Hello, children of God. The good news is we set up the live stream and we clicked go live. The bad news is then you have to click go live again for it to actually go live. So unfortunately, Scott's lesson tonight was not recorded, and I am not a replacement for Scott by any means, but I'll give a quick recap for those of you that missed out tonight and are catching up on it through the video. So tonight's topic was the human condition, and the focus of the lesson is we rebel against God when we sin, but God consistently comes to us with mercy and forgiveness. So there are 4 key words that we talked about tonight: sin, judgment, separation, and mercy. So what is sin? Well, let's see. There, I found it. So the definition of sin that we talked about tonight is an action that causes a breakdown of relationships. So sin could cause a rupture in human relationships, or human and divine relationship with God, or a relationship with creation. Sin is something that we do or something that is done to us that creates separation and alienation in our lives. Judgment is deciding what action or punishment results when someone does something wrong. So actions have consequences, and sin has negative consequences. And often that involves some kind of judgment or punishment, deciding what is the consequence going to be. Separation, the result of this breakdown in relationship caused by sin, is maybe the end of a relationship or division, and it's the consequence of somebody's actions. It's distancing oneself from another person or experiencing a distance from God. Mercy is compassionate treatment and loving kindness. God's mercy is evident in the forgiveness we receive every day, because we sin every day and God forgives us every day. God's mercy is never ending. So those are the key words. Next, we open the Bible to the story that's in Genesis chapter 3. Here's the Bible. By the way, if you're coming to confirmation on Wednesday night, bring your copy. There are some here you can borrow, but bring your own. So Genesis, first book in the Bible. Chapter 3 is right here on the 4th page. So I'll read the verses here. It's Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 13. Now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal that the Lord God had made. The serpent said to the woman, "Did God say, 'You shall not eat from any tree in the garden'?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden." But God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, or you shall die." But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. They heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, and the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" He said, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." God said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" The man said, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me the fruit from the tree, and I ate." Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this that you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent tricked me, and I ate." So the second story of creation, not the one with the 6 days of creation God rested, but the next one was the story of God creating the human and then creating the companion for the human. So we get man and woman, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden. God has commanded them, you can eat of any tree to have food, but not this tree in the middle of the garden. And the serpent deceives the woman, makes her question God, and she trusts the serpent instead of trusting what God had said. She disobeys, and the man also disobeys. He chooses to do the same thing. So the result, the consequence, is here at the end of chapter 3. Starting in verse 22, then the Lord God said, see, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. And now he might reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life to eat and forever. Therefore, the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. God drove out the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden, God placed the cherubim and a sword flaming and turning to guard the way to the tree of life. So the consequence of their disobedience is that now they cannot live in that garden, because now that they have this sin, this sinful condition, if they were to eat of the tree of life, they would be stuck with it forever. So God says, you can't live here anymore. The cherubim are angels that are there to guard the way, the flaming sword to make sure that they do not come back there. Now the human beings have to till the ground, plant crops, and create the food that way, find their food from the crops that they grow. This is the consequence of that sin. Then in the next chapter, their next generation. So Adam and Eve have these children, Cain and Abel. This is the next story that we looked at tonight, because we see how quickly sin escalates. So now that they have sinned, and because they were the forebears of all human beings, right? All humans have this condition. We are all prone to sin. If you and I had been those two people in the garden, eventually we would have been deceived and taken and eaten from the fruit too, the fruit of the tree. So in the next generation, their children have inherited this problem, this brokenness that's in the world now. So they have Abel, the younger son, was a keeper of sheep, and Cain, the older son, was a tiller of the ground. And they each bring offerings to the Lord. Cain brings some of the fruit of the ground that he is tilling. Abel brings part of his flock, portions of the flock, because he keeps the sheep. And when God has regard for Abel's sacrifice, Cain gets jealous and becomes angry and says to his brother, hey, let's go out into the field. And when they're out there alone together, Cain kills his brother because of his jealousy. So now we've got murder. Very quickly it goes from just disobeying God and not doing something God said not to do, to taking the life of another person and your own brother because of jealousy that's there. Sin is something that gets passed down generation to generation. Sin is something that exists in the world around us, and sin is something that is in the very air that we breathe. Sometimes sin is other people doing something to you, and you experience consequences of that were not your own decision. If you do something that's harmful, and even if you didn't mean to, you still did something that was harmful. And of course, we all choose sometimes to do things that we know are harmful, that we know are going to cause brokenness and separation. That's the problem of sin, and it's the human condition. And this is where the last word, the key word, mercy, is in. It was interesting tonight when Scott asked everybody, so what do you think the consequence was for Cain? What was God's judgment? And everybody said, well, death. He killed his brother, so God probably killed him too. But instead, God showed mercy. And God said, from now on, you cannot be with your family. You are going to be a wanderer on the face of the earth. But I'm going to mark you with this sign, protect you, so nobody's going to kill you the way that you killed your brother. Your life will be spared, and you will live, but you will live wandering around from place to place, and you will no longer be here with your family. There is a consequence, but there is mercy that God shows. The sin is forgiven, and also the consequence is still there. The result of that sin is still experienced. And Cain probably deserved to die because he killed somebody, and each of us deserves to die for the wrong things that we've done, but God's mercy is forgiveness and life instead of death. That's kind of what the whole story is all about. So the last thing that we talked about tonight was considering some questions about, like, well, so what does this mean? If God forgives us all the time anyway, can we just do whatever we want because we're forgiven anyway? And the answer is no. We are called to do the very best that we can. We are called to be the people God created us to be. And it is God's forgiveness that cleans the slate, that washes us anew in our baptism every day, and that's free to obey God, to honor other people, to be people who are good stewards of creation, to be people who are serving those in need, to be people who are fighting against the sin that exists in the world. That is what we're called to do as God's people. The reason that we are set free is so that we can be free to serve others, no longer worry about whether I'm going to go to heaven or hell, whether I'm good enough. God says, you're not good enough, and I love you anyway, and you're forgiven. And this human condition that is still inherent in you, you are a sinner, but God forgives you and makes you a saint. And here on earth, we experience that at the same time, but we are saved by grace through faith. God shows us mercy every day, even though we sin every day. So we really shouldn't just take that grace and treat it as cheap grace and do whatever we want. We should know that grace is costly. It cost Jesus his life. He went to the cross for us, and he rose again for us so that we can experience that new abundant life in him. So now everybody's in their small groups and considering those kinds of questions about what are the things wrong that we tend to do? What are the things that we could do but don't? Each of that is an aspect of sin. And are we a bad person because of sin? Are we a good person because God says that we are forgiven? Considering how that affects our lives and how we see ourselves in light of God's grace and mercy, despite the sin. So I know that I'm not nearly as entertaining as Scott probably is in his lessons. Next time, I'll need to both go live and go live. But hopefully this will help you to be caught up on the things that we were talking about tonight. And hope we see you next week. And I guess I'll end by saying what I usually say. Go in peace, and remember, God goes with you everywhere you go.